I never imagined my life would become the kind of story people whispered about in grocery store aisles or lowered their voices over at church picnics. I was the kind of woman who kept to herself, waved politely, baked extra muffins for neighbors, and minded her own business. In a town like ours that used to be enough to stay invisible, safe, and interesting, I liked it that way. Until my neighbor decided she needed a villain. Her name was Carol Whitman, and she lived 3 houses down from mine, in a pale yellow house with white shutters and a porch always decorated for whatever season came next. To the town, she was warmth and smiles, the woman who organized bake sales and volunteered to help anyone who looked like they needed it. To me, she was just another neighbor, until the afternoon she destroyed my reputation with one sentence. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were my quiet days. No errands, no visitors, just laundry humming softly and sunlight coming through the kitchen window. I was folding clothes when my phone started buzzing nonstop, message after message, missed calls piling up so fast my screen blurred. At first, I thought something terrible had happened. A car accident? A fire? Something urgent. Then I opened the first message. Is it true? That was all it said. Confused, I opened the next one. I didn't think you were that kind of person. My stomach tightened. Another message came in. I hope you're okay. People are talking. By the time I reached the end of the notifications, my hands were shaking. No one explained what they meant. No one said what was being said. Just hints. Judgment. Distance forming in real time. I called my sister first. Why are people asking me if something is true? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated. That pause told me everything. What? I pressed. She sighed. Carol told people that you were seeing married men, that you broke up a family years ago and covered it up. The room felt suddenly too small. Too bright? What? I whispered. She said it like it was a fact. My sister continued, like everyone already knew. She told it at book club last night, said she felt guilty keeping it to herself. I sank into a chair, my knees barely holding me upright. The story was a lie, a twisted, ugly lie stitched together from half, glimpsed moments and assumptions. Years ago, after my divorce, I had been seen having coffee with a man who happened to be married. What Carol didn't mention, what she conveniently ignored, was that his wife was sitting at the same table. They were friends. I was friends with both of them. But Carol didn't need truth. She needed scandal. By evening, the lie had legs. When I stepped outside to take the trash out, a woman across the street suddenly found something very interesting on her phone. Another neighbor who usually chatted over the fence pretended not to see me at all. At the corner store, the cashier's smile felt forced, her eyes darting away as if looking at me too long might stain her. That's when I understood. Carol hadn't just told a story. She had chosen me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake replaying every interaction I'd ever had with her, searching for the moment I missed, the moment when kindness turned into a weapon. By morning, exhaustion sat heavy in my bones, but beneath it, something else had formed, resolve. If Carol wanted a war of stories, she should have remembered one thing about small towns. Secrets never belong to just one person. I didn't go looking for her secret that day. I didn't need to. It came to me the way truth always does, quietly, through patterns you only notice when you finally stop trusting appearances. Carol liked to talk. She liked to be admired. And she liked to be seen as morally superior. Those kinds of people are rarely as clean as they pretend. I started remembering small things. the way her smile tightened whenever certain names were mentioned. The unexplained absences. The panic in her eyes the one time I casually mentioned public records at a neighborhood meeting. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now, I did. By the end of the week, my name was poison. Invitations stopped. Conversations ended when I walked into a room. Carol never confronted me directly. She didn't need to. She watched from her porch as people passed judgment, sipping iced tea like she was enjoying the show. That's when I realized something important. She thought I would stay silent. She thought shame would keep me small. She thought wrong. I didn't want revenge. Not at first. I wanted my life back. I wanted my name back. But every attempt to correct the lie was met with polite nods and skeptical looks. Once a story settles into a town like ours, it becomes truth simply because enough people repeat it. And that's when I understood the cruel brilliance of what Carol had done. She had weaponized reputation. So I decided to reveal hers. Not out of spite, out of necessity. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was this Carol's secret was far worse than the lie she told about me. And unlike her story, mine could be proven. The town had no idea what was coming. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't just clear my name. It would change how everyone saw her forever. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my own name being spoken outside my house. Not loudly, not cruelly, but carefully, like people do when they're not sure if the walls can hear them. I stood still in my bedroom, heart pounding, listening as two familiar voices drifted through the open window. One of them belonged to Mrs. Klein from across the street. The other was unmistakably Carol's. I just feel awful for her, Carol was saying, her voice coated in syrupy concern. I didn't want to say anything, but when you hear things for years, you start to worry about the kind of influence someone has on a community. Mrs. Klein hummed sympathetically. It's such a shame. She always seemed so normal. That word landed harder than any insult. Normal. As if I had crossed some invisible line and become something else. I closed the window slowly, hands shaking, not with fear anymore, but with anger sharp enough to cut. Carol wasn't just spreading a lie. She was cultivating it, nurturing it, making sure it sounded like reluctant truth instead of malice. By noon, the damage had multiplied. The library committee postponed my volunteer shift until things settled. The woman who usually sat beside me at the diner asked for her check early and left without finishing her coffee. Even the mailman avoided eye contact, delivering letters like he was dropping something contaminated. I had lived in this town for nearly 20 years, raised my children here, built friendships here, and in less than a week, Carol had reduced me to a cautionary tale. I tried calling her once, just once. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. There was no point. She wasn't interested in hearing my voice. She preferred people talking about me, not to me. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started writing down everything I knew about Carol Whitman. Not rumors, not suspicions, just facts, dates, moments that never quite made sense until now. And the more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. Carol had arrived in town 12 years ago, freshly divorced. With a tragic backstory, she loved to retell an unfaithful husband, a broken heart, a brave new start. People embraced her quickly. We're good at that here. We like redemption stories, especially when the storyteller looks you in the eye and sighs at the right moments. Within 2 years, she'd married again. A quiet man named Harold, who worked in accounting and spoke rarely at social gatherings. Carol spoke enough for both of them. No one questioned it. But I remembered something most people didn't. The first time I met Carol, she wasn't living in the yellow house yet. She was renting a small place near the edge of town, and she hadn't been divorced for long at all. In fact, she hadn't been divorced yet. I remembered because I'd helped her carry boxes inside. She'd thanked me, laughing nervously, and said she was between lives. At the time, I thought it was poetic. Now I realized it was evasive. I pulled out my old phone and scrolled through photos from that year. Block parties, community picnics, holiday gatherings. There it was, a picture taken at a 4th of July barbecue. Carol stood beside a man who wasn't Harold. His arm was around her waist. Too intimate for a coworker, too comfortable for a friend. I zoomed in. The man wore a wedding ring. My pulse quickened. I didn't jump to conclusions. I never had. Instead, I did what Carol should have done before opening her mouth about me. I checked. Public records are a funny thing. They sit quietly, minding their business, until someone decides truth matters again. I drove to the county office the next morning, heart pounding, as I requested documents I'd never thought I'd need. Marriage records, divorce filings. It didn't take long. Carol Whitman had overlapped her marriages by nearly 8 months. 8 months during which she told this town she was healing. 8 months during which she played the role of a wronged woman while quietly building a new life on deception. And that wasn't all. As I dug deeper, something else surfaced. A lawsuit, settled quietly, filed by her first husband's sister. Something about falsified statements, missing funds. Nothing criminal, just enough money and manipulation to make things disappear. My hands trembled as I read. This wasn't gossip. This was documented truth. I sat in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel, the weight of what I now knew pressing heavily on my chest. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sick. Because now I understood why Carol had chosen me. She needed someone else to be the villain, so no one would look too closely at her. I drove home slowly, passing familiar houses that suddenly felt less welcoming. When I pulled into my driveway, Carol was on her porch again, laughing with another neighbor. Her eyes flicked toward me for a split second, sharp, assessing, before softening back into her practiced smile. She thought she was safe. That night, I slept better than I had all week. Not because I felt calm, but because I finally knew the truth. The following day, the town gathered like it always did. Friday night potluck at the community center. Carol would be there. She never missed it. Neither did the people who believed her. I stood in front of my mirror, straightening my jacket, looking at a woman who had been underestimated her entire life. I didn't start this, I whispered to my reflection, but I will finish it. I grabbed my folder, turned off the lights, and stepped out the door. The town was about to learn something it would never forget. The community center smelled like baked casseroles, brewed coffee, and the faint sweetness of dessert trays stacked too close together. It always smelled the same on Friday nights, comforting in a way that made people lower their guard. Familiar smells make lies feel safer. Carol knew that. That's why she chose places like this to spread them. I walked in slowly, my folder tucked under my arm like something fragile. Conversations buzzed around me, but I noticed how a few voices dipped when they saw me. Heads turned. Eyes followed. Not openly, never openly, but enough to remind me that I was no longer invisible. Carol was already there. She stood near the refreshment table, laughing lightly, her hand resting possessively on Harold's arm. She wore a soft blue sweater that made her look gentle, approachable, concerned. When she spotted me, her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before settling back into place. She didn't wave. She didn't greet me. She didn't need to. I took a seat at one of the folding tables near the back and watched. Carol worked the room with the precision of someone who had practiced being liked her whole life. A touch on the elbow here, a sympathetic nod there. She leaned in close to whisper, then leaned back to sigh. It was subtle, effective. At one point, she glanced over her shoulder at me again. This time, her eyes lingered. Not with guilt, with curiosity. She wanted to know why I was still standing. The potluck began like it always did. Plates filled. Compliments exchanged. Someone clinked a glass to announce an upcoming fundraiser. Normalcy stretched thin over the room, but I could feel the tension beneath it, like a wire pulled too tight. I waited. I waited through the announcements, through the laughter, through Carol's carefully placed sighs when my name came up in conversation nearby. Then Mrs. Klein stood. She cleared her throat, tapping her fork against her plate. Before we move on, she said, I think it's important we address something that's been weighing on the community. My heart thudded once. Carol's shoulders relaxed. Mrs. Klein glanced around, then in my direction. We all value honesty here and trust. And when concerns are raised, well, we owe it to ourselves to talk about them. Carol nodded solemnly beside her. This was it. This was the moment she had engineered. I stood before Mrs. Klein could say my name. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor echoed louder than it should have. The room fell quiet, not abruptly, but with the slow realization that something unexpected was happening. I agree. I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. We do owe it to ourselves to talk honestly. Carol's eyes narrowed slightly. Mrs. Klein hesitated. Well, if you'd like to respond, I would, I said. But first, I'd like to clarify something. I walked toward the center of the room, feeling every stair press against my back. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I simply placed my folder on the table and opened it. I've been accused of breaking up a marriage, I said calmly, of being involved in affairs, of hiding immoral behavior. A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. I want to say clearly and publicly, those accusations are false. Carol's lips pressed together, and I continued, since my name has been discussed so freely, I think it's fair we look at facts instead of whispers. I pulled out the first document. This, I said, holding it up, is a certified record from the county clerk's office. Carol's smile disappeared. This document shows that Carol Whitman finalized her divorce from her first husband on September 18th. Murmurs spread. I pulled out a second page, and this shows that she legally married Harold Whitman on January 5th of the same year. The room went still. Which means, I said evenly, that Carol was married to two people at the same time for nearly 8 months. Gas broke out. Carol's face drained of color. That's not, she started. I didn't stop. There is also a settled civil case filed by her former sister in law regarding falsified statements and financial discrepancies. I laid the document flat for anyone nearby to see. Again, public record. Harold turned toward Carol, confusion etched deep into his face. What is she talking about? He asked quietly. Carol's mouth opened, closed, opened again. You told us you were divorced, Mrs. Klein whispered. Carol shook her head, backing away slightly. You don't understand. That was complicated. That was private. Private, I repeated softly, is something you respect in others. Carol's eyes snapped to mine, fury flashing through the shock. You're doing this to hurt me, she spat. No, I replied. I'm doing this because you hurt me first, and because lies don't deserve protection. The room buzzed now, confusion, shock, disbelief swirling together. Someone asked a question. Someone else whispered, I had no idea. Harold's voice cut through the noise. Carol, is this true? She looked at him, then at the room full of eyes that no longer saw her as harmless. She didn't answer. That silence said everything. I closed my folder gently. I didn't want this, I said. I didn't choose to make my life public. But once you do that to someone, you don't get to control how the truth comes out. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Carol grabbed her purse, her movements jerky and ungraceful. She pushed past chairs and people without another word, the door slamming shut behind her. Harold stayed seated, staring at the table like it might explain everything if he looked hard enough. The room slowly exhaled. Someone approached me, hesitant. I'm sorry, she said. I should have asked you before believing it. Others followed. Apologies layered over one another, awkward and late but sincere. As I gathered my things to leave, Mrs. Klein stopped me. I misjudged you, she admitted quietly. I nodded. We all do sometimes. When I stepped outside, the night air felt lighter, cooler. Not triumphant, but honest. The town would talk. I knew that. But this time, they'd be talking about the truth. The parking lot was nearly empty. When I stepped outside, the hum of voices fading behind the closed doors of the community center. For a moment, I stood there under the dim streetlight, breathing in air that felt cleaner than it had in weeks. Not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because the lie was no longer suffocating me. I didn't drive home right away. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, replaying the look on Carol's face when the room turned against her. Not with satisfaction, with something closer to disbelief. She had truly believed she was untouchable, that her version of the story would always be the one people chose. Small towns are funny like that. They reward confidence more than truth until confidence cracks. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone was buzzing again. This time, the messages were different. I'm sorry I believed it. Can we talk? I should have asked you first. I didn't answer right away. Apologies don't erase damage. They don't rewind the looks, the silence, the way people avoided my eyes as if shame were contagious. But I read every message, letting them settle without rushing myself into forgiveness. The next morning, the town woke up to a new story. At the coffee shop, conversations paused when I walked in, not with suspicion this time, but with awkward curiosity. A woman at the counter offered me a free refill without meeting my eyes. Another leaned over and whispered, "That was brave, what you did." I took my coffee and sat by the window, watching the street like an outsider observing a place I thought I knew. Carol didn't leave town that day. I half expected her to pack up in the night, to vanish the way people do when their masks finally slip. But her car remained in the driveway, her porch light still turned on at dusk. She just disappeared socially. No more walks around the block. No more cheerful waves. No more organizing committees or volunteering to help. The woman who had once been everywhere suddenly became invisible. And the town noticed. People started connecting dots they hadn't wanted to see before. The quiet way Harold withdrew from gatherings. The abrupt cancellation of a fundraiser Carol used to run. the silence from a woman who once filled every space with her voice. A week later, Harold knocked on my door. He looked older than I remembered. Tired, his shoulders sagged like he'd been carrying a weight he didn't know how to put down. "I'm not here to argue," he said quickly, as if bracing himself. I needed to hear it from you." "Did you know?" I shook my head. "Not until she told people lies about me." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "She says you wanted to humiliate her," he murmured. I met his eyes. I wanted my name back. He let out a long breath, the kind that comes from realizing the truth doesn't belong to one side. "She never talks like this at home," he said quietly. "She's different." I didn't respond. There was nothing to add. He thanked me for my honesty and left, walking down the steps with the careful gait of someone whose world had shifted. Over the next few weeks, the town's tone changed again. It wasn't just that Carol's secret was known, it was that people began to examine their own role in spreading mine. Conversations grew more cautious. Questions were asked instead of assumptions made, at least most of the time. But gossip never truly dies. It just changes direction. Some people said I went too far, that I should have taken the high road, that exposing Carol's past was unnecessary. I listened without arguing, because the truth is, those opinions came from people who had never been the target. They had never woken up to a life rewritten without their consent. One afternoon, as I watered my plants, Carol finally approached me. She stood at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed tightly, face rigid with restrained emotion. "You enjoyed it?" she said flatly. I turned off the hose and faced her. "No," I replied. "I survived it." Her jaw clenched. "You could have talked to me first. And you could have done the same," I said calmly. She laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me now?" I studied her, really studied her, for the first time without the filter of politeness. "I think," I said slowly, "that you were afraid someone would look too closely at you, and you chose me because you thought I was quiet enough not to fight back." Her eyes flickered. "You ruined my life," she whispered. I shook my head. I revealed the truth. "What happened after that was between you and the people you lied to." For a moment, she looked like she might say something else. Apologize, maybe, or confess. Instead, she turned and walked away. That was the last real conversation we ever had. Months passed. The town moved on, as towns always do. New scandals replaced old ones. New rumors filled the empty space. Carol and Harold eventually sold their house. No farewell party, no goodbye cards, just a moving truck one quiet morning and a for sale sign that came down a week later. People asked me how I felt about it. I told them the truth. I feel free, because what Carol never understood was this: reputation built on lies is fragile. Reputation built on truth can bend without breaking. I learned something else too. Silence protects the wrong people. And when someone decides to make your life public without your consent, you are not obligated to protect their privacy in return. The town still talks about what happened. Some call it scandal. Some call it justice. I call it the moment I stopped being afraid of being seen. After Carol and Harold moved away, a strange calm settled over the neighborhood. It wasn't peace exactly, more like the quiet that follows a loud argument when everyone retreats to their corners to think about what was said. The yellow house sat empty for weeks, its porch decorations stripped away, its windows dark at night. People passed it more quickly than before, as if afraid the walls might still be listening. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Because while Carol was gone, The echo of what she started lingered. Lies have a way of staining even after they're disproven. Some people smiled at me now with warmth and apology. Others smiled too quickly, too brightly, as if eager to prove they had never doubted me at all. And then there were a few who avoided me altogether, not out of judgment, but discomfort. It's hard to look someone in the eye when you realize you helped hurt them. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Klein at the post office. She hesitated before approaching me, clutching her envelope like a shield. "I've been thinking a lot," she said quietly, "about how easily we all believed something awful without proof." I nodded. "It happens," she sighed. "It shouldn't. No, it shouldn't." But acknowledging that truth was more than most people managed. As weeks passed, something unexpected began to happen. People started telling me their stories, not publicly, not loudly, but in hushed conversations over coffee, in corners of the grocery store, on slow walks around the block. A woman confessed that a rumor nearly cost her a job years ago. A man admitted his family stopped speaking to him over a lie no one ever bothered to verify. A teenager tearfully told me she'd been bullied after someone twisted a private message into something ugly. I listened because I understood now what it felt like to be talked about instead of talked to. One evening, my daughter called. "Mom," she said carefully, "people are sharing your story online." I stiffened. "What do you mean?" "There's a post in the community group. Someone wrote about what happened without names, but everyone knows." I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell the world to stop dragging my life into the open like a lesson they could point to and dissect. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger through all of this, understood something important. Stories, once released, don't belong to us anymore. The comments were mixed. Some praised me for standing up for myself. Others said I should have let it go. A few accused me of being just as cruel as Carol. I read them without responding because the people who mattered already knew the truth. The following Sunday, I went to church for the first time in months. I slid into a back pew, uncertain how I'd be received. During the passing of peace, a woman I barely knew turned and took my hand. "I'm glad you're here," she said simply. It was enough. After the service, the pastor approached me gently. "If you ever want to speak about what you went through," he said, "you'd have a place." I thanked him, but declined. Not every truth needs a stage. That summer, I focused on rebuilding the parts of my life that had quietly withered under scrutiny. I hosted small dinners again, took long walks without worrying who might be watching, laughed more freely, slept better, and slowly, my name stopped being paired with scandal. It became paired with something else. Strength. I didn't ask for that reputation, but I accepted it. One afternoon, as I tended my garden, a young woman stopped by my fence. She looked nervous, twisting her fingers together. "I just moved in," she said, "and I heard what happened to you." I waited. "She's telling lies about me," the woman whispered. "Another neighbor, about my marriage." My chest tightened. "What did you do?" I asked softly. She looked at me with desperate eyes. "I don't know. I'm scared." I stepped closer to the fence. "First," I said gently, "you write down the truth, not the version you think people want to hear, the real one. Then you decide who deserves to hear it." She nodded slowly. "And remember," I added, "silence is only peaceful when it's chosen. When it's forced, it becomes a weapon." She thanked me and walked away, shoulders a little straighter than before. That's when I realized something unexpected. What happened with Carol didn't just change my life. It changed how I saw responsibility. I used to think minding your own business was the safest path. Keep your head down. Don't rock the boat. Let things pass. But sometimes letting things pass is how they grow into monsters. I don't regret revealing Carol's secret, not because it hurt her, but because it stopped her from hurting others. The town still talks about it. They always will. Stories like that become part of local folklore, retold, reshaped, softened over time. But when people ask me now what really happened, I tell them this. A lie tried to ruin my life. The truth ended it. And that's the version I'll stand by. The first time I saw Carol's old house occupied again, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like a reminder. A young couple had moved in, fresh paint on the porch railing, flower pots arranged neatly on the steps, laughter drifting from the backyard like the house had finally exhaled. People waved at them the way they once waved at Carol, smiling like the past had been scrubbed clean. But I knew better. A town doesn't forget. It only learns to speak differently. For a while, the gossip about me faded into the background noise of everyday life. My name returned to normal conversation. People invited me places again, asked me favors, complimented my baking as if nothing had ever happened. Sometimes that bothered me more than their coldness had. It was easier to face open judgment than to watch people pretend they hadn't participated. Still, I let life move forward. Until one afternoon when I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of one of the documents I had used at the community center, Carol's overlapping marriage records, with one sentence written in thick black ink across the top. Oh, my throat tightened. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at those words, feeling the old dread creep back in. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the knowledge that some people don't accept consequences. They collect them, sharpen them, and look for a new target. I showed the note to my sister. "She's gone," my sister said, trying to sound reassuring. "She can't do anything now." But I didn't believe that. People like Carol don't vanish. They relocate. They reinvent. They find new rooms to perform in. Over the next few days, small things started happening. My trash can tipped over in the night. My flowers were pulled out by the roots. A smear of mud appeared across my front porch steps, like someone dragged their shoes deliberately. Nothing big enough to report. Just enough to feel watched. Then the new neighbors approached me awkwardly. "Hey," the woman said hesitantly. "We got a weird message." My stomach sank. "What kind of message?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a Facebook DM from a profile with no photo. It said, "Watch out for the woman next door. She's dangerous. She ruins lives." My hands went cold. Carol wasn't in town, but her shadow still was. That evening, I sat alone in my living room with every light on, listening to the quiet outside like it was a warning. I thought about how easily Carol had turned the town against me the first time, how quickly people embraced a narrative as long as it was juicy enough. And I realized something. Carol didn't just want revenge. She wanted the last word. The next morning, I drove to the police station, not to file a dramatic complaint, not to beg for protection, but to create a record, a paper trail, a quiet shield. The officer behind the desk listened politely as I explained the note and the vandalism. He nodded, asked a few questions, and wrote it down. "You think it's her?" he asked. "I think it's someone who wants to keep the rumor alive." I replied carefully, He nodded again. We'll note it. If it escalates, come back. As I turned to leave, I noticed a familiar face stepping out of a nearby office. Deputy Mason. He'd gone to school with my brother, a steady, quiet man with kind eyes and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. He looked at me and frowned slightly. You okay? I hesitated. Then I told him the truth. His jaw tightened as he listened. You shouldn't have to live like that, he muttered. I'm not trying to start a fight, I said quietly. He shook his head. You're not. Someone else is. On the drive home, I felt the old ache return, not just fear, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from realizing that in small towns, your worst day can become a permanent identity if someone decides to keep it alive. But when I pulled into my driveway, I saw something that snapped me into focus. A woman stood across the street talking animatedly with Mrs. Klein. She wasn't Carol, but she had the same posture, the same performative concern, the same careful glance toward my house as if measuring me. The woman noticed my car and smiled, too sweet, too quick. Then she turned back to Mrs. Klein and whispered something that made Mrs. Klein's eyes widen. My stomach clenched. It was happening again. Not Carol, but a new mouth repeating old poison. I walked inside calmly, but my mind was racing. Carol had left the town, but she had planted seeds. And someone, maybe a friend, maybe a relative, maybe just another bored person hungry for drama, was watering them. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for the profile that had messaged my new neighbors. Blank page. No photos. No posts. Only a list of friends hidden. But the username caught my attention. It was a phrase Carol used often. A little saying she'd repeat at book club with a laugh, like it was her personal motto. My blood ran cold. She hadn't moved on. She'd simply changed masks. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding, and stared at the screen. If Carol was trying to restart the rumor, she'd underestimated one thing. I wasn't the same woman she had targeted the first time. And if she wanted a second round, this time I would end it permanently. I didn't confront anyone right away. That was the old me, the woman who reacted, who explained, who tried to clear the air before it grew toxic. This time, I chose something different. I watched. Over the next week, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The same woman I'd seen whispering with Mrs. Klein appeared everywhere I went. At the grocery store, she lingered near the produce section, her cart barely moving while her eyes tracked me through the mirrors above the aisles. At the coffee shop, she sat 2 tables away, pretending to scroll on her phone while her ears strained for every word around her. Her name was Linda Parker. I knew that much from the town directory. She'd moved back recently after, years away caring for family, which was the sort of vague explanation that earned sympathy without inviting questions. She fit in quickly. Too quickly. Too quickly. I overheard my name again at the pharmacy. She seems nice enough. Linda said in a soft, concerned tone, but you never really know people, do you? The woman she was speaking to nodded slowly. That's what I heard? I stood frozen at the end of the aisle, the words settling over me like a familiar chill. Linda wasn't repeating Carol's exact story. She didn't need to. She was doing something more effective. She was planting doubt. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing again, subtle messages this time. Careful ones. Everything okay lately? Just checking in. Some strange things being said again. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen, feeling the old anger rise, then settle into something colder and clearer. Carol had trained Linda well. Or maybe Linda didn't need training. Maybe she saw an opportunity and took it. Either way, I refused to play defense again. That evening, I called Deputy Mason. I don't want drama, I told him. I want this documented. He listened carefully as I explained what I'd noticed, the messages, the profile, the timing, the repetition of rumors with slightly altered wording. This sounds coordinated, he said finally. That's what scares me, I replied. Not that people talk, but that someone is determined to keep the story alive. He paused. If this is harassment, we can investigate, but we'll need more than patterns. We'll need proof. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Then I'll get it, I said. For the next few days, I lived my life normally. I went to the store, took walks, attended a small book gathering I hadn't missed since all of this began. And every time Linda was there or arrived shortly after, she always smiled, always nodded, always listened. One afternoon, she finally approached me directly. I hope you don't mind, she said, her voice gentle, apologetic. I just wanted to say I admire how strong you've been through everything. I studied her face carefully. The concern looked practiced, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. Thank you, I said calmly. It hasn't been easy, she sighed. Small towns can be so unforgiving. Once people hear something, they repeat it. I finished. She smiled tightly. Exactly. I leaned in slightly. Funny thing, though, people are also very quick to believe the worst when someone keeps reminding them. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. I'm not sure what you mean, she said lightly. I think you do, I replied. The smile vanished. Linda straightened. I'm just worried about the community. About patterns? Patterns? I echoed. Like anonymous messages, or repeating rumors without naming names. Her jaw clenched. Be careful, she said quietly. You don't want people thinking you're paranoid? There it was, the same tactic Carol used. I smiled back. I don't worry about what people think anymore. She watched me walk away, her gaze heavy on my back. That night, I checked my messages again. Another note from the blank profile. She doesn't let things go, does she? I forwarded it directly to Deputy Mason. This time, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. 2 days later, Deputy Mason called. We traced the account, he said. Not conclusively, but enough to establish probable cause. It's linked to an IP address in Carol Whitman's new town. My chest tightened. She didn't let go? I murmured. No. He agreed. She escalated. Linda, it turned out, was Carol's cousin. The pieces fell into place so neatly it almost hurt. The move. The timing. The careful restart of the same narrative through a different voice. Carol hadn't come back physically, but she'd never really left. With that confirmation, something inside me finally snapped into place. I wasn't dealing with gossip anymore. I was dealing with intent. The next morning, I met with Deputy Mason and provided everything I had: screenshots, timestamps, witness statements from my new neighbors. It wasn't dramatic. It was methodical, and it worked. By the end of the week, Linda received a formal warning, not just for harassment, but for acting as an intermediary in an ongoing pattern of defamation. She didn't come by my house again. She didn't smile at me in public. In fact, she stopped showing up anywhere I was. As for Carol, a cease and desist letter followed her to her new address. Whether she read it or laughed at it, I didn't know. But the messages stopped. The whispers faded. And for the first time in months, my life felt quiet again. Not tense quiet, but earned quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Because sometimes the most powerful ending isn't revenge, it's refusal. Refusal to be dragged back into someone else's story. Refusal to carry shame that was never yours. Refusal to stay silent when silence is used as a weapon. The town still talks about what happened. But now, when they do, they talk about something else too. They talk about the woman who stood her ground and didn't let anyone rewrite her life again. When the warnings were issued and the messages stopped, people assumed everything was finally over. They said things like, "Good, now you can put this behind you." As if the experience were a coat I could simply hang back in the closet and forget. But trauma doesn't work that way. It lingers quietly, showing up in small moments, hesitation before answering the phone, a tightening in the chest when laughter suddenly stops in a room, the instinct to double, check doors that never needed locking before. Still, I tried to live normally. I returned to routines I loved. Morning walks, Saturday markets, even volunteering again at the library, though I chose shorter shifts at first. Staff welcomed me warmly, almost overly so, like they were trying to make up for their earlier distance. I accepted their kindness without resentment. Growth, I had learned, often comes clumsily. One afternoon, as I was shelving books, a teenage girl approached me. She hovered nervously, twisting the strap of her backpack. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you the lady, the one from the story?" I smiled gently. "I suppose I am." She looked relieved. "My mom said you stood up for yourself, that you didn't let people lie about you." I nodded, unsure where this was going. She took a breath. "Someone's doing that to me at school, spreading things online, and I don't know what to do." In that moment, I saw myself months earlier, confused, cornered, overwhelmed by something I didn't ask for. I gestured to a nearby chair and sat with her, speaking quietly so others wouldn't hear. "You start by telling the truth to someone who will listen," I said. "And then you don't stop just because it's uncomfortable." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. When she left, I stood alone between the shelves, struck by how far the ripples of one lie could travel and how powerful the response to it could be. That evening, I received an unexpected call. It was Carol. I stared at my phone for a long moment before answering. I wasn't afraid. I was curious. What do you want?" I asked calmly. There was a pause, then a sigh. "You always did like to play the hero," she said, bitterness leaking through her words. "I never wanted to be part of your story." I replied, "You forced me into it." She laughed softly, without humor. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," I said. "I think you're tired of being exposed." Her breathing grew shallow. "You ruined everything." I closed my eyes. "You did that yourself." Silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. "I just wanted people to see you the way I saw you," she whispered. "And how was that?" I asked. "A threat," she admitted. "Someone who could make people look too closely at me." There it was. The truth she'd never said aloud. "I won't apologize for telling the truth," I said gently. "But I won't fight you anymore either. I'm done." She didn't respond. The line went dead. I set my phone down and felt relief, not triumph, not closure in the cinematic sense, just the quiet understanding that some battles end not with reconciliation, but with acceptance. The town never fully forgot the scandal. Stories like that don't fade, they evolve. But the tone shifted. Instead of whispers filled with judgment, there was caution now. People asked questions before believing, at least more than they used to. Months later, during the fall festival, Someone brought it up casually. You know, a man said over cider, that whole thing taught us something. I raised an eyebrow. Did it? He nodded. That being loud doesn't make you right. I smiled into my cup. As the leaves changed and the year turned, I felt something settle inside me, a steadiness I hadn't known before. I no longer measured myself by how others saw me. I measured myself by how I responded when tested. The experience hadn't hardened me. It had clarified me. I still believe in kindness. I still believe in community. But I also believe in boundaries, in truth spoken plainly, and in the right to defend your name when it's dragged through the mud. The town still talks about what happened. But now, when they do, it's usually followed by something else. She didn't deserve that. And sometimes I wish I'd been that brave. That's enough for me. By the time winter arrived, the town had settled into a rhythm that felt almost familiar again. Snow softened the streets, quieted the corners where gossip once lingered, and wrapped everything in a silence that felt earned. I found comfort in that stillness. It gave me space to think, not about Carol, not about Linda, but about who I had become in the aftermath of being talked about, judged, and nearly erased by rumor. I realized something important during those months. Surviving public shame changes the way you listen. You hear things beneath words now. You recognize the pause before someone speaks, the careful tone of someone trying not to offend, the subtle testing of boundaries. I became attuned to it, not suspicious, but aware. One evening, while shoveling snow from my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Klein watching me from across the street. She hesitated, then crossed over carefully, boots crunching in the snow. I wanted to apologize again. She said, cheeks red from the cold. Not just for believing Carol, but for repeating it. I rested my shovel against the fence. Thank you for saying that. She nodded. I keep thinking, what if no one had stopped it? What if you hadn't stood up? I shrugged lightly. Then someone else would have been next. She swallowed hard, understanding exactly what I meant. After she left, I stood there longer than necessary, letting the cold sting my hands. Because that was the truth no one liked to admit. Gossip doesn't need truth, it just needs permission. And once it's given, it looks for new targets. That winter, I began writing. Not publicly, not for attention, just for myself. I filled notebooks with reflections, moments, things I wished I had said sooner, things I was proud. I finally said it all. Writing became a way to reclaim my voice without handing it over to an audience. Sometimes I imagined what I would say if the town asked me to tell the story in my own words. I would tell them that shame grows fastest in silence. That kindness without boundaries is vulnerability, not virtue. That people who weaponize morality often fear their own reflection the most. But no one asked, and that was fine. Spring arrived quietly. The snow melted. The yellow house bloomed with new flowers planted by the young couple who had moved in. Laughter returned to the sidewalks. Children rode bikes past my driveway again without their parents pulling them closer. Life didn't reset. It continued. One afternoon, I received a letter forwarded from Carol's old address. No note. No explanation. Just a return receipt showing she'd signed for the cease and desist and acknowledged it formally. I stared at the paper for a long time. That acknowledgement mattered more than an apology would have, because it meant she knew. She knew she couldn't rewrite this anymore. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in a drawer with the rest of the documents, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. Evidence of a chapter closed by truth, not erased by denial. Later that week, I attended a small gathering at the community center. nothing formal, just coffee and conversation. As I poured myself a cup, a woman I barely recognized leaned in and whispered, "You know, when all that happened." I realized how afraid I was to be next. I met her eyes. "You don't have to live like that." She smiled faintly. "I know. I'm learning." That was the quiet legacy of it all. Not vindication, not revenge, awareness. The town didn't become perfect overnight. People still talked, still speculated, still made mistakes. But there was a pause now, a hesitation before repeating something ugly. A glance around the room, a question asked instead of an assumption made. And that pause mattered. One night, as I locked up the library after a late shift, I caught my reflection in the glass door. For a moment, I barely recognized myself, not because I looked different, but because I felt different. Lighter, stronger, no longer bracing for impact. I walked home under a sky scattered with stars, the town quiet around me. I thought about how easily my life could have gone another way if I had stayed silent. How easily Carol's lie could have defined me permanently if I had chosen peace over truth. But peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's surrender. And I had learned painfully, publicly, that standing up doesn't make you cruel. It makes you visible. The town still talks about what happened. They always will. But now when they do, they don't talk about a dirty secret. They talk about a lie that failed and a woman who refused to let it win. By the time a full year had passed, I realized something subtle but profound had changed, not just in the town, but in me. I no longer flinched when my name was mentioned unexpectedly. I no longer wondered what version of me someone else was carrying around in their head. That constant self-surveillance, the exhausting habit of monitoring how you're perceived, had finally loosened its grip. Freedom, I learned, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself with applause or dramatic endings. It arrives slowly in moments so ordinary you almost miss them. Like answering the phone without a knot in your stomach. Like walking into a room and choosing where to sit without scanning faces first. Like laughing, really laughing, without wondering who might be watching. One afternoon, while sorting old papers, I came across the folder again, the one that started it all. The documents, the screenshots, the records that had turned lies into facts. I sat on the floor for a long time, flipping through them, remembering how heavy they once felt in my hands. How dangerous, how final. Now, they were just paper. I thought about throwing them away. Instead, I kept them not as weapons, but as reminders. Proof that truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Proof that even in a place where whispers travel faster than facts, reality eventually catches up. That evening, I ran into the young woman who had once asked me for advice at my fence. She looked shown different lighter, more confident. I reported it, she told me proudly. The messages, the posts. I didn't stay quiet. I smiled. Good. They stopped, she said. And people apologized. Some didn't. But I don't care anymore. I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't expected. Maybe this was the real ending. Not Carol leaving town. Not Linda retreating into silence. Not even my name being cleared. Maybe it was this. The knowledge that one person standing up can quietly give others permission to do the same. The town council invited me to join a new committee on community standards and online behavior. I declined politely, not because it wasn't important, but because my role wasn't to become the town's moral compass. I had already given what I needed to give. Sometimes survival is contribution enough. On a warm summer night, I sat on my porch watching fireflies blink in the yard. A neighbor waved as she passed. Another stopped to chat briefly about nothing in particular. The ordinariness of it all felt like a gift. I thought about Carol, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with clarity. She had believed that controlling the story meant controlling reality, that if she spoke first and loudest, no one would question her. She had underestimated something simple and stubborn. Truth doesn't disappear just because you talk over it. It waits. I don't know what became of her after she left. I don't need to. Her chapter in my life closed the moment I stopped reacting to her shadow. Whatever battles she carried forward were no longer mine. What stayed with me instead was a lesson I wish I'd learned sooner. You don't owe politeness to people who harm you. You don't owe silence to people who lie about you. And you don't owe your peace to anyone who demands it at the cost of your truth. The town still talks about what happened. They always will. Stories like mine become part of the place, retold to newcomers, softened with time, reshaped by memory. But when my name comes up now, it's usually followed by a pause. And then someone says, she stood up for herself. That's enough. Because in the end, this was never about winning or losing. It was about refusing to disappear, about choosing visibility over comfort, about understanding that truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken, and that sometimes that's exactly what saves you. I close my door at night without fear. I wake up without dread. And when I look at myself in the mirror, I see someone I recognize. Not a rumor, not a cautionary tale, not a secret. Just a woman who told the truth and lived to see it change everything. I didn't plan for the story to become a lesson. I never wanted it framed that way, like something neat and instructive with a moral you could summarize in a sentence. Real life doesn't work like that. Pain doesn't arrive to teach you anything. It arrives to test you, to strip you down to what you believe when no one is cheering. But as time passed, I began to understand why people still talked about it, not because it was dramatic, not because it was scandalous, but because it exposed something most people quietly fear, that your life, your reputation, your name can be taken from you in a single afternoon if someone decides to tell the wrong story loudly enough. And that terrified them. I saw it in the way conversations changed after everything settled. People asked more questions. They hesitated before repeating something sharp. Not always, but more than before. And that hesitation mattered. One evening, while walking home from the market, I passed a group of teenagers laughing on the sidewalk. As I moved closer, I heard one of them say, "You don't know if that's true. Remember what happened to that woman? They didn't say my name. They didn't need to." I kept walking, heart full in a way I never expected, because in that moment, my worst experience had quietly become someone else's pause, someone else's restraint, someone else's second thought before cruelty. That was enough. I learned that being the subject of gossip doesn't make you weak. Surviving it doesn't make you heroic. But responding to it with truth, steadily, firmly, without apology, changes the shape of who you are. There are still moments when I think about how close I came to staying silent, to telling myself it wasn't worth the trouble, that it would pass on its own, that people would eventually forget. They wouldn't have. Carol's lie would have hardened into my identity. Linda's whispers would have kept it alive, and I would have learned to shrink myself to survive it. Instead, I chose something harder. I chose to speak, not loudly, not cruelly, just clearly. And that choice followed me into every part of my life afterward. I became less afraid of difficult conversations. less willing to laugh something off just to keep the peace, less patient with people who mistook kindness for permission. I also became gentler with myself and with others who found themselves in similar storms. I stopped assuming people were strong just because they were quiet. I stopped assuming silence meant consent. I stopped believing that the absence of noise meant the absence of harm. The town will keep telling the story long after I'm gone. Details will blur. Names will fade. Motives will be simplified. That's how stories survive. But I know what really happened. A woman tried to destroy me by telling a lie. I refused to disappear by telling the truth. And somewhere along the way, the balance shifted. Not in my favor alone, but in favor of honesty. If there's one thing I hope people carry with them when they hear my story, it isn't admiration or sympathy. It's awareness. The understanding that rumors don't spread because they're true. They spread because they're convenient. Because believing them costs less than questioning them until someone stands up. The town still talks about it. They always will. But when they do, they aren't talking about my so-called dirty secret anymore. They're talking about the moment a lie was exposed and the woman who decided her name was worth defending.